First of all, is Dr. Jim Liu with Prime Medical Health and Wellness. And you guys, as I'm saying your names, feel free to turn on the cameras and turn on the microphones. Also, Anthony Cassano, the VP of Portfolio Operations Investment Management. Dr. John Meyer, Hodges University President. Joe Morris, CTO with ITVantage Incorporated. Terry Dirr, Director of Technology for Shaw Development. And I believe John Talmadge is able to join us now as well, the Director at the Lee County Economic Development. Good evening, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us. First, what we'd like to do, just so everybody in the room kind of gets a sense of who you are and what your business is doing, if each one of my panel members could just tell me a little bit about your company and kind of what you have been doing for the last 6-7 weeks now, and give us a sense of what's next for you guys. Let's go ahead and start with Dr. Jim Liu.
Okay, thank you. Part of the panel, I represent the healthcare part, and I'm a practicing physician, and Prime Health and Wellness is basically a multi-provider group. And so, you know, I think before we were thinking about telemedicine, telehealth, and these are things that I think consumers generally thought was kind of interesting. But you know, we did a lot of the traditional seeing people in person, you know, and kind of taking care of people at the bedside. I think after, you know, this COVID thing kind of started coming about, we kind of thought, well, maybe it was something we could bring the telehealth out, but it happened actually a lot quicker than we thought it would. And so, you know, our providers, you know, got trained, you know, we created standard operating procedures. We started to do a lot of things in different ways to take advantage of the telehealth, whether it be by computer portals, you know, we have in-house developers, and you know, also robots. So we actually use the double robot. So we have about 10 of these guys, and then we go to the facilities, and you know, I think patients like it because they are appreciative. We don't kind of subject them to extra risk for exposure, and I think our staff too, you know, kind of take delight that they. It's been kind of an interesting transition, but you know, something that we thought would come along and just came along a lot quicker.
All right, Dr. Liu, thanks so much. Anthony, if you don't mind turning on your mic and telling us a little bit about your company and what you guys have been doing.
Sure, thank you, Lindsey, appreciate it. So my company, I work for a company called Lateral Investment Management. We're a small investment advisory firm that's actually headquartered in San Mateo, California. We have investments in a few different companies across the U.S. and internationally. We have employees not only in California, but also in Southwest Florida, New York, and Boston as well. So really kind of two things in terms of how we've been working during this COVID crisis and really kind of what we're focused on. So really how we've been working is really not too dissimilar from what you see at a lot of other companies. So really now that we have had the stay at home for a significant period of time, really a lot of what we've done has been mostly online and mostly through Zoom meetings and utilizing that type of technology. And for us, I think it's gone very well. I think our level of work is actually, we're quite busy and maybe even in some form or fashion busier than usual. I will say the big change there is from a travel perspective, where a lot of us are used to being on the road, similar to myself, you know, head of portfolio operations with sort of a focus on finance and accounting, usually out at one of our portfolio companies across the company. So typically logging 100, 150, 200,000 miles a year, really for the last, say, 2 to 3 months have been home and really have been focused on that technology to really stay in touch with our clients. And then really the last point in terms of our areas of focus is really just kind of having a core focus on our portfolio companies, which are in different industries, and really just trying to be partners and be business partners with them from an advisory standpoint. So really thinking about their business from looking at their numbers and going to the original budgets and the 2020 views and the longer term views, and being able to kind of scrap that and have a view of pre-COVID and post-COVID. And to get a sense of, you know, what's the best way to plan for that. And really a lot of focus or areas of focus for us has been on the Paycheck Protection Program. I'm sure a lot of us on this meeting have seen that and really helping and assisting our our portfolio companies work through that and have had some level of success on that. So lots of things going on, very busy, but certainly times that are unique and ones that we're working through.
I think if we can all adapt to this, then we can pretty much adapt to anything. Thanks, Anthony. Next up, let's go ahead and have Joe. If you can open your mic for me, please, Joe, and tell us a little bit about your company.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thanks for having me. My name is Joe Morris. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for ITVantage. As Alan mentioned earlier, ITVantage provides IT and security services for clients not only here in Southwest Florida, but also across the country. We have most of our employees are working remotely right now. We have some that are in Washington, D.C. They're actually working in some of our healthcare facilities. We have a few employees that decided to work in our office. That was the best place for them, and we've been servicing our clients fully during the pandemic. We haven't reduced any of our staff during the pandemic, but we actually have added one team member in late March to our team. We continue to provide remote on-site emergency support to all of our clients. That was really important for us. And right now we're looking at how we transition back into the office. Thank you.
So let's go ahead and go next to Dr. Meyer with Hodges. Dr. Meyer, if you can go ahead and.
I did it right. How about that? So good evening, everybody. I'm John Meyer. I'm the president of Hodges University. And what we do, I think, is no surprise to anybody. We provide workforce education programs at the associate baccalaureate and master's level. We also provide certificate programs. We also have a robust English for speakers of other languages program. That's a certificate program also. And really for us, about 10 years ago, we developed an emergency response plan, like a contingency plan for hurricanes, basically, because, you know, this is Southwest Florida after all. And because our two campuses are geographically so proximate, if we were to get a bad hurricane, a Charlie-like storm, but bigger in diameter, then it would have taken out both campuses potentially. So we had to come up with a mechanism for how we maintain operations in that event. By then, we'd been doing online education since 1995. So by then, we had a big set of experience working remotely with students and putting classes online and that kind of stuff. But we didn't have a mechanism for putting the workforce online. And so as part of that process of doing that planning, we instituted a process whereby essentially at the flip of the switch, everyone can work remotely. So when COVID began to rear its ugly head, actually when the schools closed, when the K-12 schools closed, that's when we made the decision. And we said it took 5 hours to get everybody packed up and out of the buildings, and they're all working remotely. So 100% of our workforce is still with us, and 100% of our workforce is working remotely. And 100% of our instruction shifted to online. That's all going to be great in the short term. It'll carry us easily through the end of this month. But for some of the programming, some of the particularly the healthcare stuff, physical therapist assistant or registered nursing programs, it's going to be important to be able to get those students back into a situation where they can do their lab work, their clinical work, those kinds of things. So we're now thinking about or designing how we're going to phase some of these students back onto campus. And actually, we're looking to do that as soon as the beginning of June. So the challenge, honestly, I believe for us is going to be how to undo the contingency plan rather than how to execute it on the front end. It's going to be harder to undo it than do it.
Interesting. Thanks, Dr. Meyer. Finally, Terry, let's go ahead and hear from you a little bit. Again, you're with Shaw Development.
Thank you, Lindsey, and good evening, everybody. So Shaw Development is a global fluid management company who's focused on providing innovative components and system-level solutions to OEMs in the commercial and military heavy-duty vehicle market. So all those nice trucks that people want to play with out in the fields, those are the types of vehicles that we produce here. Since we are an engineering manufacturing company, we do all our own manufacturing here in Bonita Springs at our two locations. it was a pretty big shift for us to go to this COVID-19. You know, we did not work from home very often. While we had the infrastructure in place to do that, it was nothing that we've ever really considered because everybody was still in the office supporting the manufacturing floor. So when this happened, one of the first things we had to do was actually test our infrastructure to make sure that we could do it. We had to secure VPNs, obviously, and we had Teams in place and all the Microsoft Office tools in place that allowed us to do it. But it was really the cultural shift that allowed us to, have people work at home and figure out who could work at home and then who needed to stay here to support the manufacturing floor, because obviously you couldn't take the manufacturing floor home. So that was a big shift for us to do that. And then just this past Monday, we came back into the office. So we're all back in. And then that was another shift. So it was being able to make sure that the cafeteria was set up to be safe. So, you know, we had a series of maybe 6, 7, 8 microwaves that we now spaced out across the cafeteria so people weren't standing on top of each other. We have sanitation areas where people can clean their desks. We have the maintenance team cleaning the offices twice a day, and then we have maintenance at night cleaning the facilities. So it's just been a big change in terms of how we operate. Some wear masks, some wear gloves, so it really up to each individual. But we are practicing social distancing. Our meetings, we can't have more than 4 in a room, and the boardroom no more than 6. So we are, trying to do our best to make sure that we're all staying safe and practicing social distancing as best we can.
Thank you, Terry. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And like Alex mentioned, if anyone's listening in and you have questions, feel free to type them in that Q&A. It should be on the box on the right hand of your screen, and I'm keeping an eye on that. So is Alex, and we'll try to get to those as well. For my panel members, you're doing perfect. When you're not talking, just go ahead and keep your mics off. I'm going to try to direct my questions, panel members, directly to one of you, but feel free to just kind of give me a little nod, a finger if you would also like to address the question, because a lot of these are going to be applicable to everybody who is joining us tonight. So I want to make sure I give all of you a chance to speak. And I did see a couple notes, people asking if this is recorded. It is being recorded. Alex, I saw that you are recording it. Good job. He remembered. And it'll be posted to the YouTube channel afterward as well. So you can always check that out on the Southwest Florida Regional Technology Partnership website. But let's go ahead and get started. So Terry, I'd like to actually come right back to you because you are talking about, having to adapt to everything. And then now here we are kind of reopening in phase 1 in Florida, except for some of the East Coast. So first of all, my first question for you is, did you guys, I would imagine when you went remote, some people still had to stay in office in the Bonita Springs office. So how did that work? And have you brought everybody back, or are you trying to figure out this new norm of the people who have to be on site are on site and adjusting to that while keeping some people remote, and how all that works?
Yeah, so great question. When we made the decision that we wanted to go remote, which was basically when they started closing everything down, each team, each organization, each department came up with a plan. So there wasn't a case where everybody who could work at home worked at home. So most of the departments had at least one person on site, and they tended to rotate that. So in my case, I always had my network infrastructure guy on site and available. The help desk was being supported remotely. In the finance team, they alternated, who worked. In the engineering team, they took a week where these 6 or 8 people always worked at home, and then the next week they shifted who worked at home. So they tried to balance it where they still had support in the office from the office staff, but we did allow people to work at home. And then on the manufacturing floor, obviously everybody was still there, and anybody who directly managed or led the manufacturing floor had to stay behind. So it was mostly the support organizations that were able to work from home. So, and I generally came in maybe 1 day a week, just to make sure that, things are still here. And so
did
then
you feel like it worked? It was successful having that partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting because in certain departments, in the finance area and the IT area, we were even more productive. And, what you found is, people didn't have to drive to work. People were working through lunch, and you end up, it's a 13-hour day and you got a lot of stuff done. It's very different than, some of the challenges you face when you're in the office. But we had teams working, so everybody was able to communicate via Teams. They loved it, and it was interesting because we were just rolling out Teams probably in early February, and we were still trying to get people up the learning curve, but that learning curve became got solved pretty fast because people got on it and were able to use it and were just as productive as if they were in the office. So they could reach out, they could call, and people enjoyed it because they could really focus and get their jobs done. So in many ways, I think it helped a lot with productivity. And then coming back, everybody is back now. So the decision was made that on May 4th, we all came back.
Okay, so definitely prefer to have everybody in-house than switch to remote when the option is there.
Yeah, the cultural preference is to be all on site. But I think,
all right, Carrie, thanks.
Yeah, I think there will be some, evaluation of maybe we can have a little bit more flexibility in the future. I think we're looking at that, but certainly the preference right at the moment is all on site.
All right, thank you. Dr. Liu, I'd like to get to you. You talked a little bit about that robot because you have a really interesting element here. Your workforce was able to transition and provide that, but how does the patient feel? You're general medicine, so people are still being seen during all this time. And in fact, what we've been reporting is you wanted to send a message as a healthcare group, not just you guys, but in general, people need to come to their doctor, and not avoid it just because they're afraid of COVID-19.
Yeah, so I think patients, it depends on the situation. I think in the very, we operate in the hospital setting, in like skilled rehab and in clinic. I think the less acuity, the less sick the patient, then I think the more willing they are to accept it. I think in certain situations, like in the hospital, because I actually round in all three systems here, our team does, robot would be kind of difficult because still the patient expects you to come in, see them, listen to them via stethoscope. That's kind of to be expected. I think in the less acute situations like skilled rehab, the clinic, I think the acceptance was fairly easy, and that they actually appreciated sort of the robots coming in. We would usually get a nurse to come and just sort of introduce like us, because sometimes it's a little odd for a robot to just wheel in and then say hi to you. That's kind of, uninvited in some ways and a little bit, obtrusive. So I think we had to still pay attention to the social decorums to a certain extent. But then I think once patients got into it, and we serve pretty much a geriatric population, pretty surprising to see someone be able to engage with something like a robot. And once they saw your face, they kind of recognized you from before, and that kind of got them more into it. In clinic, getting a robot was kind of difficult because, obvious for obvious physical reasons. And so we more use I would say like a online portal, and that seemed to gravitate with people pretty well. I think you still had a divide with some people who were willing to use something different, or sometimes some people are very technophobic, especially we found like people maybe older than 80, 85 years old. I think they typically tend to not to have the technology, or if they did, they didn't feel comfortable with using the technology for those purposes. So a lot of times our staff actually helped to coach them through it. And we were actually able to get like an 85-year-old lady to get onto the telemedicine portal. So, we would just include her telephone number. It would send an email, and then she just clicked the link and was able to get in. And I asked her how, for your age, I'm pretty impressed. And she said, I just followed the instructions, and then she got on. So I was, it's sometimes not an age thing either. I think it just depends on if people are willing to take on something new or not. But I think the idea is changing. So I think more people are open to a telehealth visit. And in fact, I think they felt that we out, whereas they wouldn't have been able to get medical care. Now, this is another venue. And it's not to replace, but it actually adds a lot more to the healthcare experience that we're trying to provide.
We actually had to do telehealth with my 2-year-old because he did have a fever for a little while during all of this, and he's fine. But I will tell you, it's harder to get the vitals than it looks. I really struggled with that. Joe, let's move on to you because let's talk about technology here. With the clients you're working with, what does your technology landscape look like, and how are you helping them? How are you and were you helping them through all this process?
Yeah. So as Terry mentioned, we have a lot of clients right now that are moving to the cloud, whether it's Office 365, Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services. So we've seen that the last year or two, and that's really helped the customers that are already there to be able to collaborate and work from home pretty easily. The transition for those customers was much easier than those that were on premise. The ones that were still on premise, there was a lot of moving and shaking to get everything to where they could easily work from home because they weren't set up for that originally.
For these companies to maintain a secure infrastructure and teaching them?
Again, most cloud services today have security in mind first. So we're looking at services that have multi-factor authentication. But some people, again, that had on-premise systems, we use secure VPNs. We use multi-factor with secure VPNs to keep them secure.
Thanks, Joe. I want to make sure we get to a participant's question here. Joe Velderman asking, what are organizations doing to screen associates, customers, visitors coming in? You know, is it temperature checks? So Dr. Meyer, because you are saying you're hoping to, you know, get back to some kind of norm in June, let's start with you. What does that look like for Hodges?
Really good question. And the answer is, I don't quite know. What we've done is establish, we have a standing safety committee. So we established a subcommittee of the safety committee to study this very thing. So to, you know, get the CDC data, to get everybody's checklist, to find out what, and I'm not a fan of the term, but what best practices are around something like this. It'll probably look like what you'd expect it to look like. Tape marks on the floor, taking people's temperature when they come in, asking the brief, you know, have you been on a cruise in the last 2 weeks, kinds of questions. For live classes, we'll observe that 10 or fewer protocols, so one instructor and no more than 9 students, probably masks and gloves, that kind of thing. Sneeze guards, the plexiglass shields, you know, the things that we're used to seeing sort of in Publix or Home Depot or wherever you might go. Where it's going to be more challenging. So in the beginning, that'll be fairly straightforward because it'll be low numbers of people, well below the 25% capacity thresholds and that kind of thing. Where it's going to get more challenging is some of the common areas. What am I going to do with the library? Or what am I going to do with the entrance area, the waiting area? What about a student who comes in and wants to talk to his or her financial aid advisor? If you've got a 6-foot distance and a sneeze guard up, you've also got privacy considerations that have to be dealt with. So you can't have people waiting in the immediate area. So we'll have to figure out, that's what this committee is working on now, things like a cleaning schedule and what that looks like and when it gets done, those kinds of things. But I would imagine that it will be easy enough once we've sorted through all the variables, it'll be easy enough to implement the protocol. And then it's just a matter, of course, of making sure that the protocol gets followed. But I don't anticipate anything too dreadful unless phase 2 is a long way off. Then I think it gets to be more challenging.
How much a part of that discussion is when there is a case that is able to be traced back to Hodges or any company for that matter, what next? Do we shut down? So
that's a very interesting question. And I think that's the one that is being hotly debated even as we speak up in DC, where there is a movement on one side of the political aisle to provide some protections for employers and for merchants and things like that against that very issue. Life is full of risks, right? And this is another one of the risks that we have to manage. And so from my perspective, I think we don't want to hide or run from every conceivable risk, because I don't know that anyone can ever 100% guarantee anybody else's safety. And I think we have a responsibility and an obligation to our students to get them through their educational programs on time, to be able to get graduated on time. We're talking about people who will end up in the healthcare profession. So it's sort of our civic duty to get them out on time. So I think we will weigh that risk as it comes. But if we're following the CDC guidelines, if we're taking temperatures, if we're asking the appropriate behavioral questions, I think that's a fairly effective screening tool on the front end.
Thanks, Dr. Meyer. Anybody else on the panel want to address that? Because I know it's going to, we'll all have these guidelines, but it's going to look different for every industry, really. Okay, no takers. Anthony, let's switch gears to you. You talked a little bit about, business travel.
Sure.
That's the key part of what you guys do. And I would imagine in your business, maybe I have this wrong, sometimes that face-to-face interaction really can make the difference when you're talking about people's money and what you're going to be doing about that. So how has your clients, how have they handled video conferencing? And do you think moving forward, when the risk is mitigated and everyone's, feeling comfortable to kind of travel again, do you think you guys will go back to domestic or international travel, or do you think video conference is going to completely replace that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Lindsey, and one that we've been internally debating and talking through. And I think the answer is similar to others, or similar to what Dr. Meyer said for even a different areas. It's kind of TBD, right? I think right now, from a client perspective, or even from a portfolio company perspective, I think we've done a good job, and I think there's a lot of understanding from our clients in terms of it being a model that is more not face to face and more technology based and more online in that nature. So I think there's just given what's going on from that nature, there's been really good positive feedback from our clients with that. So I think that's the $1 million question, Lindsey, is when does that change? And absolutely, I think if there's a preference between being in person and being remote, certainly I think that face-to-face matters a lot. But it's going to be interesting, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but it'll be interesting to see kind of what comes out of this crisis, not only in the short and long term, not only from a technology side, but even from a medical side of what Dr. Liu was saying. How does that change what we do? How does that change how we operate? What are the new businesses and the new technologies that come out of this that I think is going to be fascinating to see? Business travel and business meetings, I think certainly is going to be impacted by that. I think there is going to be a gradual manner to get back to that, but it is interesting where you talk to different people and you look at different companies, and some of which this has been a bit of an eye-opener in terms of just the amount of productivity that they've been getting from a remote side. So I think it'll be interesting to see how many of these companies will, even as Terry mentioned, go to a bit more of a flexible model, or even have potentially a preference to something that's more remote or distance based. But again, to answer your question, I do think we'll start to go back slowly. I've seen some reports airlines travel probably 2-3 years from a miles perspective going back to pre-COVID. Again, no one knows for sure, but we hope that it's sooner, especially for those companies that are hurting and need help. But again, it'll be interesting to see how we evolve over the coming weeks and months.
Companies that you work with, as we are starting to see these reopenings, what's the sense that you're getting from most of them? Have they been able to weather the storm so far, or are because what we see on our end is it's really dire straits for a lot of people?
Yeah, it's sort of it's kind of mix and match. You have some, and just even based upon the macroeconomic numbers are disastrous, and probably the worst that we'll hopefully ever see in our lifetimes, in terms of 33.5 million filed for unemployment over the last month and a half. Just unbelievable, astronomical numbers that I don't think any of us thought we'd ever see. Call it 20, 25, 30% of the workforce that is either unemployed or underemployed. Lindsey, what we've done is really kind of focused on grouping our portfolio companies into two categories. One, and when I say sort of half our companies that we expect a bit of a V-shaped recovery. Now, I know from a macroeconomic side, probably not. But again, another one where anyone can have a bit of a forecast, and who knows how that's going to work. But we do think for some of our portfolio companies, we have some in legal software, we have some in construction, where we do feel pretty strongly that it's going to be kind of a quarter or two type of reset, that we're paused for now. We're holding on to cash now and kind of batten down the hatches in terms of their balance sheet and cash position, and really just sort of resetting from a quarter or two. And we're hopeful that once we do restart, that we feel that'll be somewhat V-shaped in terms of seeing significant growth after we are seeing positivity on the COVID side. I think we have the other half of our portfolio where we would say we would expect more of a U-shaped type of recovery. That right now, certainly difficult times. Again, cash is king in terms of understanding where they're at from a headcount perspective. Really, the majority of our companies yet have not had restructuring or major restructuring. So really trying to focus on the short term, trying to utilize, as I mentioned at the top, the payroll protection program. That's been a big success for us for a significant number of our companies, and that program actually provides 8+ weeks and other type of costs as a short-term solution. And so I think, we're hopeful that will materially cover a lot of our company needs and bringing some of those people back in some of those companies for second quarter. It'll be interesting to see sort of the next phase, or the phase 4, phase 5, whatever we're doing from a Washington perspective, and really understanding from additional stimulus how we can continue to help our small businesses, our small business owners, as they navigate the situation. Because I think all of us can kind of agree, I think original PPP is good, certainly helpful from this quarter, but I don't think any of us think that we're going to be done at the end of 2Q. So there's going to be a need beyond that. And just know that there's needs all over the board. There's needs for airlines, there's needs for travel, there's needs for states and local governments, which hopefully should be the next kind of round that rolls through. Certainly the president's talked about infrastructure and thinking about, is this the right time to do that? And I think that potentially could be something down the road as well. So, interesting times, and ultimately, again, just trying to help our portfolio companies navigate through it the best that we can.
Well said. Very interesting times, and it's going to take some time for everybody to come back. I just want to do a quick little housekeeping note. I'm getting some messages. I know that not all of you can see all of our panelists and not hear all of them. I guess we're having some technology issues. Surprise, surprise. I guess that's why my boss makes me come in every day. But we apologize. Just a reminder, I think because everybody can hear me, this will be on YouTube afterwards. So for those people who unfortunately you are missing, you'll be able to catch up with them on YouTube too. And we're going to go into networking in about half an hour, so you can run over to their table and hunt them down and ask them questions you wanted to ask. From the panel, I want to just kind of get a sense. I'm going to ask a few questions. If you can just raise your hand, because I want to get a sense where everybody lies. So everybody on my panel here, who has had job cuts in your company so far? Great. Oh, Terry. Okay.
Most of the cuts, though, were on temporary employees. So we had a lot more temporary employees. So most of those were let go so that we could keep the full-time employees. But there's been very little full-time employees that have been hit, mostly temps.
Thanks, Terry. Who anticipates to see job positions decrease the next 6 months in your industry, in your company, I guess I should say? Hard to know. Yeah. Anthony, you want to chime in a little bit?
I don't think it's much beyond, Lindsey, what I mentioned before. I think it's really dependent upon how we flow over the next quarter or two, especially for some of our portfolio clients. So for the ones I mentioned that we expect to be, if that doesn't happen, certainly there's going to be some type of restructuring. We do feel like the steps we're putting in place now will hopefully lengthen that period of time. That's really where we're at for a lot of those companies, is that we want to take care of our employees, we want to take care of our people, and we're putting those steps in place now to try to maximize how long we can, essentially hold on, utilize government stimulus, and really try to focus on those different businesses and hopefully getting back to some type of normalcy through selling and backlog, and we're seeing some of those little glimmers of hope. So we're hopeful that we don't have to restructure. Certainly it's potentially an option down the road, but we're trying to take a positive approach in terms of us coming out of this in the second half of the year.
Thanks, Anthony. I want to throw this out to any panel member here. What in this last time period have you felt was the best technology that really helped your business get through this? Was there something that stood out?
Yeah, I can say, I said it earlier, it's a communication, collaboration platforms, Teams, Microsoft Teams is what we primarily use. That was invaluable for us to be able to work with our peers and different departments as easily as if you were here, and almost easier, because all you had to do is hit the button.
Dr. Meyer, see you're opening up yours.
Yeah, I would say essentially the same kind of thing. We've been volume users of Zoom and some other things like that, WebEx and stuff like that. And it's enabled more, actually, it's very surprising to me, more efficient meetings, probably fewer of them overall, but they're easier to get into. They're easier to manage. They're easier for people to get their thoughts. I think it kind of forces someone to get to the point and get his or her thoughts out and on the table and then move on. So there's not a lot of, communal coffee drinking. You sort of get right down to it. So that's really been the thing that's worked well for us.
I'd like to echo that, I'm in Teams 8 hours a day, at least, working with my staff members, chatting to multiple team members at a time, sometimes through video, sometimes through text. We're able to share files, just like we're in the same room. So we're as productive as we can be right now.
For us, we the Google G Suite, and so we found like sharing documents. We create a lot of standard operating procedures with it, and we could co-collaborate. And actually, it's kind of freaky that you see someone typing as you were typing your protocol. So we just type to each other on the document to communicate sometimes.
Dr. Liu, go ahead and leave your mic open because we have a question from somebody in the audience I want to go ahead and get to. They're asking, with telemedicine, is there EMR system used to keep record of patient? Is there either a local or cloud record of video calls from patient to physician? And if so, is that HIPAA compliant?
Mm-hmm. So security is very important. So usually most telemedicine portals are just like a video conduit. And EMRs are very complex pieces of software code. And so a lot of times to combine everything together is pretty difficult. So, the types of things we use is sometimes the conduit is a separate piece of software from the EMR. Sometimes they're the same, but because we utilize so many different, probably 2 or 3 different platforms, for us, we found it's just easier to keep the EMR separate from the conduit. And in some cases, it's kind of easier to sequester the different systems. What we would normally do in our workflow is conduct the telemedicine visit, and the EMR is purely like an administrative piece of software to write the charting in, do your prescriptions. So we kind of use what's best for each type of software. And so security, what's interesting about sort of the whole regulations is actually the government eased a lot of the HIPAA compliance. So HIPAA is the regulatory, security, meaning that, you have to keep information as private as possible. So I believe the OCR, which is the governing body, actually ended up waiving a lot of those requirements. They still have the rules, but how they kind of put it was that we're not going to prosecute anyone for disrupting secure information, which is kind of hard to read in of itself. Well, what it kind of meant to us was, don't worry about using whatever technology, as long as you use it in goodwill, you're not going to be, people aren't going to go after you. So Skype and FaceTime, in certain iterations are not HIPAA compliant. So I think in general, people started to use FaceTime, for instance, which is not HIPAA compliant, but is very easy to connect. So a lot of people started using that actually, especially in the hospital settings. I recalled we had a patient that wanted to see their family, and we actually used FaceTime on iPads to communicate.
World that we live in that you're able to do that now. Terry, if I can get back to you, and maybe there's some other people that can address this too. Have you seen any effect in your supply chain since you guys are in manufacturing from all of this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But we've seen a lot more in the customer demand right now. Everything's really slowed down. So that's where we're really hitting it. But yeah, we've seen it across the board. So I'm in IT, so I'm not always in the day-to-day supply chain discussions. But yeah, I believe we've been hit.
Anybody else that has seen any kind of impact from that? Okay. Dr. Meyer, let's go ahead and move to you, and I'm sure there'll be other people who can chime in on this too. But you talked about how you were actually pretty well set up because we do live in Southwest Florida and we prepare for hurricanes, and how that kind of helped you guys mobilize into this. We're in a really tricky situation here, and it's been a discussion we've had a lot in our newsroom. We've got this pandemic backing up to a hurricane, and hopefully we're moving on to recovery and we're not going to see a second wave. But that makes my head spin when I think about it, and I just kind of wonder, what are your thoughts? Are you doing anything different? What do you do?
So if the question is, what do we do if we get a big hurricane as we're recovering from the pandemic? I don't know. This from a standpoint of day-to-day operations, we leave everybody remote or we send them back remote. We put any students who were on campus back online. I mean, so that's doable. We re-implement the plan. I think the difference, so it would just be a different disaster, but maybe can be conceptualized as a continuation of a disaster, like a disaster squared or something. But the difference between this and, say, a hurricane is the hurricane is typically very finite. You can reasonably figure out where it's going to go, you know, how big it is. You can reasonably forecast how much damage, flooding, who needs to evacuate, the rest of it. It'll occur. I mean, the one last year, the year before in the Bahamas that lasted for 3 days was horrific, but even that one came to an end. And when it comes to an end, then you can get in and assess the damage and begin to go from there. This is not like that because it doesn't have a finite endpoint. And it also doesn't leave an easily calculated path of destruction where you really don't know what the damage has been. And we probably won't know for maybe forever, or certainly not for years. So the aftermath is what's going to be different about these two things. If we threw a hurricane in on top of this, especially if it was a bad one, I didn't even want to think about the aftermath from that. It would be, it would, I think, be very, very trying, not just from my perspective, but probably everybody on the panel and everybody in Southwest Florida. Think about all of the infrastructure needs and the healthcare needs and the food and pets and water and power, and it does make your head spin. Yes.
Else in the panel, I'd be interested to hear if anybody else has had those discussions with your colleagues about what's going on. I mean, we're less than 20 days out, I think, now. No. Okay. Anthony, let's come back to you because I am interested. You know, I wonder, not every situation is like Hodges where they're able to easily move. And in fact, in the news, you're seeing, you know, students filing suits against colleges because they are not able to get the education. So I wonder, like 4 years down the road, does recruitment for future employees for you guys look different? Because these people who are getting critical education right now, it as much as it's great, it's just not the same always as lab work, especially when you're talking about healthcare. And so I know you're not healthcare, but you know, we'll move on to Dr. Lynn in a second. Does recruitment change for you guys?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question and concept. I think even it just gets into more of a general term in terms of what's sort of the educational debt from this, or the educational shortfall. And I think we're all as a country doing what we need to do. I mean, I have 3 children, 15, 13, 11, right smack dab in the middle of it at least from an online schooling perspective. I do think that the schools are doing their best in terms of a quick transition. They're part of Collier County Public Schools, and I think they've done a very good job in terms of that quick transition from in person to distance learning. It's an interesting question in regards to what's going to be the long-term impact from that. There's certainly going to be a short-term impact on the educational side, and maybe some of this is more for maybe not necessarily for the kids in college. I mean, although there'll certainly be some type of impact there, but definitely the kids in younger education, and even ones that have special needs and special education plans. That in-person learning is hugely important for them. building concepts, building blocks of knowledge, and to sort of take them out of the main schooling environment, they lose that rather quickly. So I don't know right now if we expect, Lindsey, any type of material change in terms of from a college graduate level perspective or overall recruitment. I think it's still the jury's out in terms of how long this is going to last. I know certainly from a higher level perspective, and Dr. Meyer can attest to this. I believe a lot of the expectation across the country, depending upon the state, is a lot of those higher level institutions are going to bring students back for the fall, and certainly under maybe a little bit of a different model. But I think it's an important point that the longer this goes, the more that we do need to be thinking about what's that educational impact across the board and what's the best way to bridge that. So it's sort of another one where we want to do the right thing from a social distancing health perspective, public health perspective, but at what cost? So again, down the road, I don't necessarily think it should create, hopefully not too much of an impact from an overall recruitment and skills perspective, at least from a business side. But certainly from as I mentioned before, I'm more so worried on kind of the younger children and ones with needs that if we're not going to be able to go back in a normal school setting, what's the best way that we can fulfill those needs and ensure that those children are getting the right type of education?
Yeah, I think that's every parent's question right now, isn't it? Dr. Liu, what about you guys? How does that work with training and then also making sure in the future recruitment is up to snuff?
It's a very good question. I think right now it seems like technology or the comfort level with it is extremely important. Medicine, as you know, is very traditional, and it's very nested in like how your teacher did things and how your teacher's teacher learned it. And so there's a lot of almost in the medical world. So when you start telling people they need to get on robots and get on a computer terminal and be able to troubleshoot your network connection issues, or I'm talking to you but you can't hear me, I think that frustrates like a lot of medical providers. So I think from what we've seen is we tried to do a crash course in like technology for a lot of our providers, and I think probably like half of them took to it. They were excited, and then there's this other half where they were like, wow, I have to change everything I do, and everything I learned has been invalidated. And they're like, how about listening to the heart? Like I can't do that through the machine, so now I'm operating differently. I'm not as confident. And so I think when we look at general medical education, so I'm in the hospitals, so I see that a lot of the residents and the medical students, they're probably not getting as much bedside opportunities to learn. And so there's always this fear, I guess, when you're more junior of contracting something or facing mortality. I was talking to a resident, I guess they don't have as much confidence level in how can they prevent getting infected, or what's the risk? Whereas like a more experienced provider, we've gone through different epidemics in the past, maybe not one so bad as this one, but definitely with SARS or with swine flu, we've sort of had that experience of wearing PPE, but certainly not quite to this level. So I think as people are graduating from their residencies, they're almost being forced to now come out sooner in some ways, and curtailing their education. And then I guess in the future, because this will be sort of the new normal, is to embrace technology. Would that ultimately change general medical education to push using telehealth? Because when I was in med school, we learned 0 hours on how to get on a computer and talk to a patient. And in fact, the bedside was much preferred. It's like if you had to do a heart exam, you want to do it from A to Z exactly the right way. And so this has really turned medicine on its head. So I think it's interesting. I think it's here to stay with telehealth. And so it'd be interesting to see how quickly the medical educational institutions pick up on this and embrace it and further the healthcare so that we can see people and increase accessibility.
Dr. Liu, thank you. Joe, I'd like to get back to you if we can. Peg's asking a question. I think you might be able to handle or answer this one. Has there been problems with working at home, internet speeds, reliability? Will ISPs be able to support the technologies? Can you address that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Peg. Early on, there was a huge surge, and there still is a huge surge on the internet networks across the world. And so there were a lot of questions around would the internet strain with all of this bandwidth that's being consumed. So far, we haven't seen a problem with the bandwidth itself. We have seen lots of struggles with technologies from home. It seems like there's always that little gremlin in your computer for a lot of workers. But for the most part, people have been embracing technology at home. It's been working well, been reliable. Here and there we see a few meetings that are disrupted by technology, but overall, it's holding up.
Thanks, Joe. Wendy's asking for me, how has technology in the media and newscasting really changed in the last 2 months, and how is it going to change in the future? Well, hopefully I'll still have a job. That's the first thing I'd like to say. Yeah, it's changed a lot, and every company's kind of different, done it a little bit differently. For my station, when everything was changing so rapidly, it felt like it happened kind of overnight, even though, we're in tune with everything so deeply. Everybody who is not essential, in the newsroom. So a lot of times our reporters and our photographers, they don't have to ever come into the newsroom. They're more efficient really if they just go straight to wherever they need to be at the story. So they do have to pick up their gear and their cars, but they are in a separate area. So they would come into the parking lot and they would come in just to their lockers to pick up their gear, pick up their car, and they would head off to a story. And we quickly implemented a rule where, when we do interviews, we call them MOS, man on street. So I'm talking about what a hot day it is. And I run up to Terry, who's sitting outside Love Boat Ice Cream, and I say, Terry, I bet that ice cream feels really good, tastes really good, and you answer a question. We got rid of all of MOSs because we just can't be running up to people, asking them questions, maintaining that 6 foot. It's not safe for us. It's not safe for the individual on the other side of that. So we had to go to Zoom interviews, which were actually really fantastic and very efficient. And then we also, you've seen them in shots all across the country. We basically, took mop handles and taped the microphone on one end, and the reporter holds it, and then the photographer is shooting. And that way we're able to maintain our 6 feet of social distance. When I've had to go into buildings to do stories, I'll be honest, I take kind of a scan of the building, and then I'll ask the people I'm visiting with if they want me to wear a mask. And if it's not a lot of people in the room and they are not adamant, I sometimes won't wear a mask because it can be very difficult. For example, I was doing a story with a pregnant mother, asking her how she was going to be giving up her 2 children to a stranger to take care of her kids while she went and delivered during a pandemic. When she can only see this much of you, it's really hard. And Dr. Liu, you probably understand this with patient care. It's really hard to get somebody to open up to you. So there have been times where I have not worn a mask in a story. One, as if I felt comfortable, and 2, if the interviewee also felt comfortable. In the station, my co-anchor and I are 6 feet apart. We share a lot of technology, touch screens and iPads, and the station quickly implemented a lot of cleaning and sanitization efforts to really make sure that, that we could clean everything in between shifts, and the cleaning crews came in. It's been a challenge, and one of the reasons I think we tried not to go completely remote and have me broadcasting in my bedroom. 1, I have a 2 and a 4-year-old. What would the morning news look like? And 2, you see that delay, and that can be very challenging as well. So I think we've done a really good job of keeping essential staff in, and the people who didn't have to be there, making sure they're out. But like Terry, we are now bringing everybody back in slowly, very strategically, but we are bringing everybody back in. Alex, if you're out there in, the Remo land, I'd like to have you join us because I know you have this workspace. And can you speak a little bit about what you guys are doing to really make sure everybody feels safe in the workspace that you're providing for them?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So we run one of the couple things that we do on the technology side is we run a co-working space, which is a pretty unique animal because we can't give full direction to the people that are within our space. So actually, Jim Liu, so part of his operation works out of our space, and in the conference room that he's in right now, right across from him, should be a cleaning schedule. And so just like a lot of industrial or healthcare environments would normally have under normal circumstances, we have implemented a lot of different rules and strong suggestions for our team and for our members. So in any open area, we have a lot of open space. We have highly suggested that any of our members, they're wearing face coverings. We do have a thermometer to check temperatures if we do have any question on somebody that's coming in and out of the space. We've obviously provide hand sanitizer throughout our environment for all of our members to use. And we have a cleaning schedule in our kitchen. We have individual phone booths to take private calls. So we have a cleaning schedule on all of those. And then all of our shared conference rooms have a reservation system. So anytime that anyone has gone into or reserved a conference room, then there's cleaning that's happening immediately after that session, as well as having hand sanitizer and everything like that available. It's interesting what we've seen. So we've seen, obviously we've seen some drop off. We're a month-to-month environment, right? So we've seen some drop off in people that utilize the open space early days, but we're already seeing people that have needs to come back. So we're having people reaching out for meetings. We had somebody that is a non-member just come in to utilize the meeting space for a couple of hours today. We've seen essential workers pick up memberships because they needed somewhere to go and they needed somewhere with reliable Wi-Fi, somewhere that's quiet. Maybe, Lindsey, to your point, just, they have children at home, or they're like me, they have like 5 dogs at home and they go crazy at any random point. So that's fine in certain instances. And, I'm on Zoom every day. I'm on Slack every day, just like Teams. I use the Google Suite. So I use all of those things. So that's fine. But if you're hosting a presentation like this, if you have 50 people in the room, you really don't need a pit bull jumping up on your lap and trying to handle that sort of interruption. So we've seen a lot of people utilizing the space for that. A lot of our members are starting to come back, but it's reserved. They're coming back for those meetings. If they have a private office, there's just a few members of the team coming in. Maybe they're coming in for a lunch meeting just for some FaceTime, and then they're stepping back. Our team is also very conscious of, okay, well, I don't need to be in the space. Jessica, our community manager, is there. She's handling everything. She's checking people in, logging people coming in, so we know who's in the space each day, just in case there is somebody that does get sick in the future, so that we can track that. But I don't need to be there because she's there. So I'm not going into the office just to limit my exposure, to limit everybody else's exposure. And that'll change as things progress and as as we watch what happens as people start getting out more and having more physical contact. But we want to do our part to limit that exposure and to limit the transmission as people are getting back to the new normal. One other thing that I will mention, you asked about supply chain earlier. We don't utilize a lot of the types of PPE equipment and things like that, but something as simple as Clorox wipes for wiping down the phone booths and the equipment and all those types of things. We can't we can't get those. So now we're looking at, okay, what are the alternative options that work well, not only for us. I mean, we can spray things down and wipe them down, but also for our members, so that we have some sort of wipe that is easy for them to use, so that their comfort level is there as well.
Thanks, Alex. I want to make sure if anybody has any other questions, please, now's the time, because we're going to be wrapping up and moving to networking. But I want to just give each panel member a quick wrap up. You know, we're going to be moving into networking in like the next 5. So if you can try to keep it as brief as possible. Can you talk about the change, the impact on the customer, short term and long term, and how you're addressing that change? And just we'll go kind of down the line. Anthony, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, I don't think I'd have a very unique answer, but ultimately I think it's monitoring day by day and really just keeping our head down and really focused on the companies that we have in various industries and understanding what's really happening, and being able to change and adapt and really most importantly stay safe overall.
Dr. Liu?
I think similarly, it's pretty unpredictable right now. So really go off the cues of what the government and also what the medical, institutional bodies sort of suggest, and that changes on a day-to-day basis. So we're pretty well read on those.
Oh, what about you?
We're really looking at how do we bring employees back to the office, what essential employees need to be in the office, and then how do we work with our clients out in the field, because we have unique clients with unique needs.
Thanks, Joe. Dr. Meyer?
So I would agree. I think with what's been said so far, I think that's absolutely 100% right. But I would add that, at least in our industry, I think this is going to be one of those defining things that really changes what the future looks like. And it's going to cause an awful lot of people inside of education, and I think a lot of people who are going to pursue education, or employers, because I heard several of you earlier say, about the 4 years later and what does it look like on the recruitment side later. I think we really have to ask ourselves, are we doing this the way we ought to be doing it? Or are there ways now, have we learned something from this process, from moving people online and from doing things at a distance and some of these other things that we've done? Have we learned from that? That's one question I've challenged my people to consider. And the other is, are there new areas of expertise that we ought to be developing to deal with this kind of thing at some point in the future? Right now, there isn't a degree in how to help somebody go remotely, right? So are there educational opportunities for things that are yet to be explored or yet to be created? And lastly, I think we really have to ask ourselves, is the 4-year degree or a 2-year degree or a master's degree or a doctorate or whatever it is that the be all and end all? Is that the right credential? Or should we be looking at maybe alternative ways of offering education or structuring education or even defining it? So that's well beyond, COVID. But I think this is one of those things that triggers, at least in somebody like me, triggers thoughts like that, like, okay, what do we do now?
Thanks, Dr. Meyer. And Terry?
Yeah, so first I'd say, that as a company, we're grateful that we were an essential service so that we were able to keep the employees employed and working and being able to provide the services that we provide to the OEMs. So very grateful for that. I think right now we're trying to monitor day to day the impact on the market and, hoping that market starts increasing. We're definitely seeing decreases in demand. But as if some infrastructure projects come in and things like that, it might have a very big impact on us. But I think it's just monitoring it day to day. And I think it has opened up, some cultural questions for us about whether or not we should be more flexible. It would help us recruit people, help us get, a different perspective. If we're able to say, yeah, maybe we can, people can work at home a couple days a week and allow that flexibility for people to have a little bit more adaptability in their lives and stuff. So I think it's a good thing, and we'll come out of this stronger, but just hoping that it's a V curve. That's what I'm hoping.
I think everybody echoes that sentiment. Does anybody else on the panel, is there anything else I did not touch on that you would like to speak to before we move back into the networking portion? You guys have all been so fantastic tonight. Thank you guys so much, really, for joining us. Thank you to the Technology Partnership for hosting this and you panelists being a part of it. I mean, I think anytime I've been doing these the last few weeks, as now instead of events, you know, at the Grand Days or whatever it may be, the one thing I walk away with is really feeling like even though we all are such different industries, we're all kind of figuring it out together, which there brings some solace, you know, misery loves company. I guess you could say. So thank you guys so much. We're going to move into the networking portion. Again, if you want to hop tables, all you do is double click and you drag yourself over and just chime in and introduce yourself. Hopefully our panelists will stick around. So if you have direct questions for them, you can do that. And again, this is going to be on that YouTube channel. For anybody who's not part of the partnership who's joining us tonight, their website's just swfrtp.org. I'm sure Alex can send that out in information as well. And thanks all. And this will conclude our panel portion of tonight.